Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and we are in the month of May. This is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I promised that on Sundays I would have a discussion, just sort of do a mini dive into uh, the Bible, scripture to get some kind of moral intelligence. And because this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and because of my experience, I've done videos talking about how I was wrongfully emergency petitioned, and then I was assaulted as a result of that false emergency, perjured emergency petition. I was assaulted and charged with a false crime, and due to the sham trial going on, the judge had found me incompetent to stand trial twice fraudulently, right? So the process, you end up going to um, a hospital, right? A mental health hospital where a doctor either observes you or treats you so you can be made competent. I've done videos in which I demonstrated how the doctors, on the two times I was found incompetent to stand trial, the doctors found that I was competent to stand trial and I had no mental illness. They never gave me any medication. They apologized and they told the judge, no, that I don't have a mental illness. And of course, I have a lawsuit against the state of Maryland that's pending. And of course, they're doing all these sham things, basically still violating my civil rights. But while there, some things I observed while detained in jail, wrongfully in jail. Um, I observed things from cellmates, and while I was wrongfully held in a behavioral health hospital, that's a psychiatric hospital, right? And I did, make a friend, and I observed people who do have mental illness, right? One of them has become my friend. He's a white guy, and he's been actually supportive, right? Since I've been out, he's been very supportive. He supported me. His parents are millionaires. I'm not going to go deep into his background, but he would ask me. He clearly knew that no, I don't have any mental illness. I was one. I wasn't supposed to be there, as the doctor said and told the judge. But he said he was surprised that even though I was in this terrible situation, I hadn't broken down. I was calm. I was assaulted several times, there in public. I was assaulted by people who were mentally ill, who were violent. I never responded, right? I never responded at all. And he was surprised that I was always calm. I slept. I had no problem with sleep. I didn't use medication to sleep. I didn't use any medication, and I was fine. And the same thing, I had a cellmate, right? My cellmates, all of them, they needed medication. They would, because, it was a difficult period experience for them. They had families. They would cry. They wouldn't be able to sleep. They would become depressed. People who were normal, they came in normal, but being incarcerated, your freedom being taken away from you. You don't know if you're gonna, because we were, by the way, we hadn't been convicted of anything, right? It was just pretrial detention, right? Because you've been charged with a crime, and so you're waiting for your court date or whatever. So some, worried that if they're convicted of their crimes, and my roommates, many of they had petty offenses, like this guy DUI, right? He was a family man, but he was, drunk driving. He was driving, on a suspended license. That was what he was charged for, and he couldn't. I'm sorry, it's so hot. I'm sweaty. Um, so but he couldn't sleep. He would cry. He would be worried. He would ask for medication so they could sleep. Because they would. The thing is, they put you under certain conditions of stress. You can develop a mental illness. Some people can break down. While I was wrongfully detained in Montgomery County, Maryland, between December 2024 and January 2025, four people committed suicide while I was there. One of them was a white guy who had, and not that they're committing suicide because they're feeble minded or they're not smart. In fact, a guy with a PhD who worked as a researcher at National Institutes for Health committed suicide as well. One of my cellmates that I had was good friends. They became close to him, and the guy committed suicide. So four people. So it's a stressful situation, and not everybody can handle it. So what I want to do today, especially in this time with the virtue signaling and the angst regarding quacks, the Dr. Cheyenne Bryant, fake credentials and not having, apparently not having a PhD in psychology or whatever, or, but people have been complaining about that. And, you know, I wanted to give an alternative, right? There's an alternative to psychology, psychiatrists, and by the way, I'm not a specialist in any of these things, but I'm a Christian, and my objective on Sundays is to just give some kind of, express, dive into the scripture to be able to acquire some kind of moral intelligence, right? I apologize, I'm sweating because we're now in summer and it's hot, right? So, so to be able to get some kind of moral intelligence, right? Some kind of moral intelligence, and you can get this from the Bible. Now, the Bible has its take on mental illness, right? So we see, I'm going to read some scripture. There's a place where Jesus is casting out demons and treating mental illness, symptoms, signs of mental illness, somebody who hallucinates, who was delusional, very violent, very erratic. The people had to constrain them, and they call them being demon possessed, you see, and Jesus heals them, casts out the demons. Now, are there instances where it's not being possessed of a demon, right? That there are other issues like having a chemical imbalance in the brain, some kind of disease. Yes, without a doubt. By the way, I'm not preaching psychophobia, or I'm not propagating psychophobia or sanism, right? Um, but there are alternatives to addressing mental illness, and one of them is religion, right? We're protected by our First Amendment to propagate our religion, to practice whatever religion we want to, by the First Amendment, right? Importantly, I've done videos in which I reminded, people who listen or whatever, my audience or whatever, that some of our founding fathers were not actually Christians, or at best they were Christian deists, right? So, like Thomas Jefferson is known to have had his own Bible. So he took up out the part of the miracles, right? And, I've done videos explaining that, so I'm not going to get deep into it. Um, but importantly, my own religion, my faith, there are miracles in the Bible, right? And we acknowledge that God is omniscient, right? He's omniscient. That means he has total knowledge, right? And that subsumes science as well, right? Um, we today modern science tries to deal with mental illness, right, like psychology and psychiatry, and we all, but God is also omnipotent, right? Omnipotent, his omnipotence means that he has absolute authority, absolute power over all things, all conditions, and that's what Christians appeal to, right? When we're talking, what psychologists and psychologists might try to deal with what Christians would call the soul, right? Um, the human material form, right, on Earth, you can divide them into three, and this is not hard and fast, but you could typically divide them into three elements, right? The material, that's the body, the soul. The soul represents our identity, our intelligence, our intellect, our mind, right? That's a mental illness. That's where there's a disruption, right? There's some kind of imbalance that a psychologist or a psychiatrist is trying to treat. Psychiatrists can use psychotropics. Psychotropics, address the chemical imbalance in the brain, right? And they try and use science, medication, right, to alter the chemical imbalance in the brain. So that's some kind of physical stuff going on, right? Still material. And that material emanates, it emanates, it manifests in behavior, right? The way we demonstrate our, people, the way people act out, and maybe it can cause some people to hallucinate, or or be depressed, have anxiety, or whatever. And so psychotropics might try to alter those chemicals in the brain, right? Because we're made up of chemicals. And of course, but there's also the spirit, right? Christians, we believe we have spirit. Many people use spirit and soul interchangeably, but no, the spirit, for Christians, the spirit is what connects us, right? Our identity with the divine, the supernatural with God, because God is spirit, right? So if we want to see these three elements that I've described, we can we can use an analogy of a computer. Since this is a computer age, information technology age, everybody we understand everything in terms of computer technology. So think of the body, right? The body as the hardware, right? It's the vessel, right? It's a vessel for the software, our soul. So the software is the mind, right? The way we think, process information, right? That's the mind, the way we our intellect, right? And that's what psychology tries to deal with. And I've called that the soul as well, right? The soul. Um, Now it can get to the spirit, right? The spirit is you can think about the spirit in terms of electricity. If we're still thinking about the computer technology, the spirit is the electricity that powers the hardware and the software that makes the computer operate. So that's the electricity, right? It's an independent outside source, but it flows through the computer as well, right? So that's the spirit. So the spirit of man is immaterial, it's transcendent, and it can connect us with the divine, with the supernatural. You can see it that way, right? So those are things that psychologists and psychiatrists cannot deal. They can't treat. They have no access to, right? You will see. So one of the psychiatrists that I met was a Christian, a born again, identified themselves as a born again Christian. You see many of them, right? But they're treating the soul, but they believe in the spirits. They believe in miracle, supernatural healing, right? And so what I want to do is show how the Bible deals with the issue of mental illness, right? The issue of mental illness. Let me first read from. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all read from. I'm going to. Sorry, I'm sweating so much. I'm going to first read from. So there was a time. So as I said, while I was wrongfully detained, I slept well and I had no problem with sleeping. In fact, when I saw that this judge was just going to keep detaining me, locking me up, I thought, okay, I'm going to use my time well. I was locked up for 15 months, by the way, without trial, not convicted for anything. The state of Maryland was just violating my constitutional rights, trying to blackmail me and coerce me to take a plea bargain, right? A wrongful plea bargain. I was charged with false crimes. I didn't commit any crime. I'm an innocent man. But I was able to use my time well. So one of the things I decided I was going to do was I was going to read. I was going to try and read like at least 12 hours a day, 12 to 13 hours every day, use my time well. And I did. I read about 100 books there. And I planned my time. I've done a video discussing the books I read. I also used my time for investigative journalism, and I slept like a baby. And my cellmates would wonder, how do I sleep like a baby? How do I sleep like this? Like there's nothing going on. I was purposeful while detained because so if you could convert all my readings to a degree, I think it would have been equivalent of at least two master's degrees because of all the readings. You don't read as much, and I read deep books, right? Not not easy, simple stuff. I read very serious books, right? Um, I read very serious books, about 100. So I'm going to just quickly show an analogy. So Peter, one of the disciples of Jesus, in the book of Acts, right? The king, Herod had actually sentenced him to death. He was supposed to be executed. He had been arrested. He was supposed to be executed the next day. Now, there was a miracle, but imagine people who are waiting the execution the next day, are waiting in prison. They're not sleeping soundly. They might have anxiety. They might not be able to sleep, right? And stuff like that. But that wasn't the case with Peter. Let me just quickly read. Peter was sleeping soundly. This is the book of Acts, if you're interested in reading it. It's from Acts chapter 6. So let me just read from verse 6, right? And when Herod, I'm reading from verse 6, right? And when Herod was about to bring him out, that night Peter was sleeping, bound with two chains between two soldiers, and the guards before the door were keeping the prison. Now, behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, Gird yourself and tie on your sandals. And so he did. And he said to him, Put on your garment and follow me. So he went out and followed him, and did not know that what was done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they were past the first and the second guard posts, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel disappeared, departed from him. And when Peter had come to himself, he said, Now I know for certain that the Lord had sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from the expectation of the Jewish people. So that was this is not being anti Semitic. This is the Bible. This is how, Peter, I was just using this as emphasis to show how Peter was of sound mind, right? He's a believer, he's a Christian, even though he was supposed to be awaiting his execution. The night before, he was of sound mind. He wasn't anxious, he wasn't depressed, he slept well. And there was people were praying for him. At the beginning of the passage I read from, the people were praying for him. Let me just read it. So prayer, that's what Christians use, and they have faith. So it says from verse 5, so chapter 6, verse 5, it says, Peter was therefore kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. So the church prays that, and they believe in miracles. They pray, they believe in miracles, and it happens. So let me give an example of how, as I was saying, that Christians, sometimes they treat um, mental illness, right, as a form of being possessed of demons, right, as a form of demonic attack, satanic attack, disease. And again, that can be the case, but there are cases where it's a chemical imbalance. By the way, I'm not talking from absolutes. Like, there's some people who don't know anything about science. I'm not that sort of person, because I was a pre-med student. I was a biological science major at Columbia University, right? I got a bachelor's from Columbia University at STEM. I did organic chemistry, 2 courses in chemistry. Um, I did biology, did genetics, right? Like biochemistry, I did physics, right? I did tons of math, so I understand the science. Uh, for science, right? We understand that atoms exist. We can't see atoms, but we understand it. But it's funny, many people do not want to appreciate that there is a spirit, even though we can't see a spirit that's transcendent. Or there's God and He's omnipotent. He's omnipotent. No, omnipotent. Omnipotent. It's hard to pronounce it. People like to say omnipotent. It's not omnipotent, but omnipotent, right? Omnipotent. He's omniscient, and that means he has all power, right? And he has total knowledge as well. And so, what science cannot, God created science for us so we can manipulate science to heal things, to cure things, right? As our, physicians and scientists do. But there's also the divine power. God has, he's the creator of the universe, and he's omniscient. He has total knowledge, and he's able to do things, and he's omnipotent and able to, he has a power to transcend, to do things that physicians, psychologists, and psychiatrists cannot do, right? So this is how Christians view, mental illness. So you can see from the perspective of being demon possessed, right? So I'm reading from Matthew. This is Matthew chapter 8, from verse 28, right? So this is Jesus now, during his ministry. I have some pop-ups. So when he had come to the other side of the country of the Gergesenes, there met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Now, a good way off from them, there was the herd of many swine feeding. So the demons begged him, saying, If you cast us out, permit us to go away into the herd of swine. And he said to them, Go. So when they had come out, they went into the herd of swine, and suddenly the whole herd of swine ran violently down the steep place into the sea and perished in the water. Then those who kept them fled, and they went away into the city and told everything, including what had happened to the demon possessed men. Right. So you can see this is from the perspective of demon possession, and importantly, I like to um, as I was saying that God is omniscient, right? He's omniscient, and being omniscient, right? It means he has power over all conditions, over all situations of man. Let me read. My purpose in reading the Bible from Scripture is, to address the issue of moral intelligence, right? Moral intelligence, the intellect, and this can give us knowledge on how to feed our spirit, the human spirit, right? And help our soul, right? Have that peace of mind. So let me read from Proverbs. I'm going to read really quickly from Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23 verse Proverbs 23 verse, let me see. Okay, now actually let me read from here. Proverbs 23 verse 23. Proverbs chapter 23 verse 23. And this is concerning knowledge. So Proverbs chapter 23 verse 23 says, Buy the truth and do not sell it, right? All wisdom and instruction, and also wisdom and instruction and understanding, right? So it's saying, buy the truth and do not sell it. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding, right? So this is something that you learn in the Bible, right? If you study the Bible, you're able to get knowledge, wisdom on how to be able to approach the divine, approach God, right? Get those blessings of uh, the spirit, right? The spirit which nourishes the mind, the soul, right? And, the physical body, right? And gives us healing, right? So I'm going to read again from Proverbs chapter 2, I'll start from verse 9. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity and every good path. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you, to deliver you from the way of evil, right? So let me read it again. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you to deliver you from the way of evil. Right? So that's reading from the Bible and regarding mental health, right? Regarding mental health. So again, remember, um, I showed how Peter was calm while he was in prison. He was awaiting his execution, ordered by the king Herod the next day, but he was sleeping calmly. He was not depressed. He was not anxious. He was sleeping soundly like a baby, just the way I was sleeping, right? While I was wrongfully detained, waiting to do a competency evaluation, and I passed both of them without any medication. The doctors were apologizing to me, the psychiatrist, that why did I come here? That they apologized, I wasn't supposed to be there, right? And they wrote the judge, Olurotimosha has no mental illness, no psychiatric symptoms. They never observed any psychiatric symptoms, in spite of the lies of the judge. So the reason I went was because the judge lied. The judge, James Bonifant, lied. And a Howard University professor had also lied by filing a fraudulent and a perjured emergency evaluation petition, lying that I was hallucinating, lying about all sorts of stuff. So the judge also lied that, oh, he saw me acting delusional. So all lies. But the psychiatrist, they held me for several months, right? They were observing. They said they didn't see anything, and they apologized to me. So, of course, my family and I, we have a lawsuit against the state of Maryland for violation of my constitutional rights and wrongfully involuntary commitment, violating my, defaming me, violating my constitutional rights. Of course, they were asking me, they're trying to coerce me, blackmail me that I should volunteer and go and see a psychiatrist. I said no. So they have this crooked, false, crooked backdoor that a judge will then find you incompetent to stand trial, and then you go to a mental health hospital. But the the psychiatrists have to follow their professional code of ethics, right? Otherwise, they'll lose their licenses. And they told the judge, no, this man has no mental illness, right? But I did observe people who do have a mental illness. And again, I don't want to advocate cynicism. I'm not spreading cynicism or anything. There are people who do suffer a mental illness. As I said, there was somebody who suffers from bipolar disorder. He became my friend, and he told me a lot. I was educated about bipolar disorder. There are people who suffer this, and medication calms them down, right, in the mind. And by the way, bipolar disorder is it's called the disease, the mental illness of very highly intelligent people. Like this person was a highly intelligent person. Again, I've talked about how Abraham Lincoln, historians, psychohistorians acknowledge, even then he used to be treated for manic depression. That's what it was called, and melancholy, right? They acknowledged that he was manifesting, a bipolar disorder. Same with Teddy Roosevelt, bipolar disorder. John Adams, John Quincy Adams. Several of our presidents have struggled with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder, by the way, is considered an intelligent people. Many highly intelligent people have struggled with bipolar disorder. Albert Einstein, that we all praise. I don't know if people know that he struggled with mental illness. He had actually been, he suffered. He had several mental breakdowns. His son, who was a genius as well, was institutionalized several times. I think one of them probably even died in a psychiatric institution, though it was very brilliant. So yes, many highly intelligent people struggle with mental illness, but I'm not one of them, right? I don't struggle with mental illness, and I was comparing myself to these very highly intelligent people. But that was one of the tricks they wanted to use on me, right? When I was, taken to the hospital, and they wanted to talk to me, and they first start with, oh, that highly intelligent people have this illness. And I said, no, I don't have any illness. I've never been treated for mental illness. I've never hallucinated. These people this Howard University professor was just lying, right? So, but I don't want to personalize this. I was just doing this for people who do struggle with mental illness. That there's an alternative, right? And faith, right? Faith in, I'm a Christian, right? Again, my objective was not to proselytize, but I'm a Christian, and if you study the Bible, if you seek knowledge, if you seek to understand the difference between the soul, right? That's normally what the psychologists try and treat, the soul, and psychiatrists, right? They try and address the soul. They can address the spirit, right? And try and learn more about the spirit, right? Your ability to combine, so your ability to connect, right? To in an immaterial way, right? In a transcendent way, to the supernatural, to the Almighty God, who can provide healing. We saw in the reading I read from Peter, who was in prison, the church prayed for him, and angels visited him, and he was set free. Now, there are issues where people will say, "Oh, is that a case of hallucination in the Bible, delusions?" I don't, nobody knows it all. Not the psychiatrist, not the psychologist. Many of them struggle with mental illness themselves. That's why they actually go and become psychologists and psychiatrists, right? I don't struggle with mental illness. So I was a pre-med student. Psychiatry, that was never my interest because, I don't struggle with that. It's of no interest to me. Of course, I want to understand deep. That was one of the reasons why I was studying that, but no interest in psychology or psychiatrist. As I said, many of the students who intended to study psychiatry or psychology were actually people who struggled. They admitted that they struggled with mental illness themselves, or they had family members who did, and they were curious in finding treatment for mental illness. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.